Modern life. Between careers, kids, and health, it can be mayhem. That's why we're here. I'm Dr. Lisa Varghese-Kroll.
And I'm Dr. Lonray Falusi. We're physicians, moms, and longtime friends who break it all down for you. Wondering how to juggle all the balls and still stay sane? Looking for advice but don't want to be overwhelmed?
Curious about how to make the most out of life for your family but enjoy it at the same time? You're in the right place. Welcome to Health and Home with the Hippocratic hosts.
On this episode, we're getting an intro on traveling with credit card points. Do you see friends taking these amazing trips on points and wonder how on earth they're doing it? Think the only way to do it is by racking up debt? Or are you interested but have no idea where to begin learning the tricks of the trade? Our guest today is a points travel expert who wants us all to get excited about a new way to look at traveling the world. Hey, Lise.
Hey, Lon. Ooh, a topic close to our hearts.
That's right. That's right. So longtime listeners will know that we believe strongly in the educational and rejuvenative power of travel for both adults and kids. Our episode 54 talked about our tips for travel, and episodes 40 and 41 talked about taking the leap of moving abroad.
Right. But we also don't believe that travel and its benefits should only be for zillionaires. So enter Points Travel. Strategically using credit card points to fund travel, both domestically and around the world, is a game changer. It opens up access to trips that you might never have dreamed you could take. But it does take strategy. And learning all the ins and outs of this hobby can be overwhelming and intimidating because it really is like learning a new language.
Exactly. And what busy adult with a job and a life and or kids can squeeze in the time for all of that? So our guest today is going to give us a primer on this world, answer some of the most common questions about it, and encourage us with some of the biggest travel wins that she's seen.
So excited.
Yes. So we do want to share one caveat, though, which is that the credit card points landscape differs widely from country to country. So the information we're talking about today mostly will be U.S. specific.
That's right. So our guest today is Dr. Devon Gimbel, a double board certified physician and founder and owner of Point Me to First Class, a business that helps employed professionals, entrepreneurs, and business owners earn tons of credit card points to travel the world in luxury. She believes that your expenses are your greatest asset if you know how to leverage them. Devon is on a mission to change the face of first-class travel and help thousands of women travel more, travel better, and travel often using credit card points. She lives in the Chicago area with her husband and 2 children. Welcome, Devon.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, we're so excited to have you too. And we would normally call you Dr. Gimbel, but you've asked us to call you Devon, so we will.
No, we're all first name basis here. It's totally fine.
So Devon, briefly, if someone has never heard of this before at all, what is Points Travel?
Yeah, so Points Travel is... Let me see if I can break this down very, very simply. So I think most of us are familiar with what I call regular travel. You go, you book a flight, on an airplane, you go book a hotel and you pay for it using some form of payment, your credit card. Back in the old days, we actually had things like paper checks, but essentially, you pay for your travel using your money, and that works well. You get to go places. But Points Travel is this really, really interesting section of travel where you can use this alternate form of currency. So instead of using only cash or all cash, you can actually use this form of currency called points or miles that you earn on specific types of credit cards. And you can use that as currency to book things like flights and hotel stays and rental cars. And the amazing thing about this is that so many people are in such a great position to be able to earn these points and miles, which then either completely eliminates the cost of some travel for them or substantially defrays the cost of it, which is really exciting to me because that means either you can do the same exact travel you've always done, but for far less money out of pocket, or, and this is my personal passion, you keep your travel budget the same, but instead of traveling the way you always have, you all of a sudden have access to higher levels of service of things like flying business class internationally when, like me, you would always book the bottom of the barrel economy ticket normally, having access to different types of hotel stays than, if you were trying to fit everything into your cash budget. So for me, it's just this magical world that's completely legal, which is kind of shocking because it's so amazing, but it's this completely legal and magical world where you can get either more travel or higher levels of service of travel using this alternate form of currency that is available to so many people.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We're
Love that.
converts, I have to say. Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. And I get that like scrolling all the way down or sorting by price, lowest
Right.
first. It's I think like
A
typically how we
hundred
most
percent.
Yeah.
yeah, most of us tend to book our travel, right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have probably had this experience where I always felt like my travel dreams were exponentially larger than my travel budget.
Oh
I
yeah.
grew up,
Yes.
not tremendously financially resourced, but really dying to explore the world. And so, for a really good portion of my 20s and early 30s, my approach to travel is what I called travel by any means necessary, which was essentially, you do find, the least expensive ticket you possibly can, which might entail a couple of really long and inconvenient layovers, and taking evening, buses through countries because then you don't have to pay for a hotel room. So I have a very, very broad range of travel experiences at different, travel price points. But yeah, I think especially too for those people who, if you're in a stage in your life where if you've chosen to expand your family and you've moved beyond solo travel or just travel with a partner, I think you realize very quickly, even though, if you have children, initially they're very small, they're still quite expensive. When you've got to put them on an airplane with you or if you've got to go and stay in a hotel room with multiple human beings, these things add up really, really
Right.
quickly. And I think this is true even if you do make, a quote unquote high salary or a higher than average income, travel is expensive. And so I think everybody is always looking for ways of, how can we increase our efficiency in terms of what we're able to get for the money that we do have allocated for travel? Because so many people do value these travel experiences.
Absolutely. And as you said, when you start adding children, it's not like, I'm a pediatrician, so I think about weight-based dosing.
Right.
So like how much
I
per
wish we
kilogram
had
of weight.
that for travel.
Airlines don't think that way. Hotels don't think that
Why
way,
isn't
right?
it like kids under 18 fly free? I don't understand. Like
It
somebody
should
explain.
be. Exactly.
I know. I think that
exactly.
is
So
the most brilliant thing I've
frustrating.
ever heard. There absolutely should be like age and weight-based
Yeah.
travel dosing, for what the expenses
Totally.
are. But as we all know, that is not the
It's not
case.
the
Sadly,
case.
no.
Yeah. So how did you then get into this as a hobby in terms of thinking about using points travel?
Yeah, that's a great question. This for me goes back about 10 years. So I finished all of my training. I did a residency and fellowship, and I graduated from fellowship in 2012 and then graduated to my first grown up attending job. And I was in a position that I think probably a lot of people maybe can relate to, which is that it was the first time in my life where I was actually making what felt like a real salary. We do get paid obviously in residency and fellowship, but for the hours you work
Oh, it's
and
less
for
than minimum wage.
right,
Yeah.
and for your expenses. And I had, student loan debt. I didn't really feel like I was living some financially luxurious life when I was in training. And I came out of training and had, significant student loan debt and also had financial goals. A lot of us come out of training in our 30s, late 30s, and we're kind of behind the ball compared to our peers in terms of our ability to have saved, to have put away money for retirement and investments. And because I came from a background that was not very financially resourced, I also had no financial education. And that was a very scary thing for me that, I was finally in a position where I was making, an attending salary. And I felt like this is the first time in my life I actually have some shred of disposable income. And I need to start understanding, how do I become responsible around my decisions with money? How do I make all of these different decisions about where can money be allocated? How is this best going to help me accomplish, my future financial goals? And I knew nothing. And so for me, this really started with just trying to get a personal finance education online, which is where I find a lot of educational resources. And it was really in studying a lot of personal finance blogs that, you end up going down little Google rabbit holes. You click on a link that takes you to another link that takes you to another link.
Oh yeah.
And I kind of landed in this world at the time of points travel blogs. And it was really fascinating for me because people were talking about doing amazing things with points, traveling internationally in business class, which to me is like, never, ever, ever considered that to be a possibility. But I think that's kind of like the holy grail for a lot of long haul travelers because you got to walk through that front cabin first and see what you're not getting before you head to your, your little cramped tiny seat in the back of the airplane. And I think part of what really appealed to me was not only this idea of, wait a minute, theoretically, you can do this thing where you take the money you're already spending on your expenses, but you put that specifically on this, type of credit card that earns you points or miles. And then you can use those points and miles for incredible travel. Like that element for someone who always wanted to travel and again, has a very long history of traveling extremely uncomfortably. I was like, this sounds really, really interesting. And I think it also kind of pinged, I think a lot of, physicians or people in kind of similar professions, we have a really, I think we have a strong inclination towards problem solving, right? I think that we love puzzles. I think we love to see, how something can fit together so that we can have a really great outcome, on the other end of it. And to me, using points kind of pulled all of those elements together. It seemed like this big puzzle to solve. And if you're successful at solving it, the prize is that you get to, potentially fly first class or business class internationally for a couple $100 instead of paying economy, like paying more for economy. Right. I was like, no. Like if this is true, like this is going to be completely my jam. And so I just started slowly. I think that was one of the things, I started slowly and I just kind of started practicing and saying, okay, is this really too good to be true? Or is this really how it works? Can I really just take, again, my regular expenses, use, certain types of credit cards? Can I actually earn points and then be able to use them in this way where it's not going to take me 10 years to save up for one flight, or I don't have to do anything that I consider to be financially risky or irresponsible? And lo and behold, it wasn't too good to be true. I mean, this was actually a legitimate way, to very, very easily open up this whole entire world of travel.
It's so interesting that you say that because, I totally agree, but it is, I'm sure you have experienced the skeptics, as I think everyone in, anyone who even dabbles in credit card points has had people tell them, no, this is going to damage your credit score. You're going to end up declaring bankruptcy. You'll have to change your identity and go on the run. Like, what do you say to people who really don't understand and kind of have these fears that you're really letting yourself in for a life of crime?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I actually think it's very important to acknowledge that so many of us do have fears around specifically credit cards. And I think, at least for me personally, I think a huge reason for that is because there is such a lack of education. And I'm really hoping that's changing now. But I know certainly for me, I'm a child of the 80s and 90s, and there was no such thing as just easily available financial educational information. So what I learned about finances, about money, about credit cards, I personally learned from my single mother who was very financially strapped, and I was taught at a very young age, credit cards are bad. They're dangerous. If you have them, you're going to get into a lot of financial trouble. And that scared the crap out of me, as a kid. And so I never had credit cards. And so I think that, first of all, even for people who then have progressed into adulthood, right? Who, especially now, we have access to the internet. That didn't exist when I was 10. There was no Google. There was nothing. There were no financial blogs. There was no Instagram, all of these things for our generation have not been there the whole entire time. And so I think a lot of us, first of all, just acknowledging, wow, a lot of what I know about money, or a lot of what I may know about finances and credit cards, maybe that's only because of the information that I was exposed to, when I was younger, or from my family of origin or my community of origin, right? And I think that's why education is so vitally important. So just a personal finance education, because then you can actually start learning what is true versus just what was I handed, right? Like I was handed a lot of fears about money and specifically credit cards. And one of the things, like I said, when I got into this hobby, for me, one of just sort of the prerequisites was, and I'm not doing this if it's going to be financially risky, or if it's going to be something that can potentially harm me, financially. Like, no business class flight is worth a terrible credit score, right? Like, and I would say that
a jail sentence,
right? We can't put, or you can't let the tail wag the dog, you know what I mean? And so, I think part of that concern is really important to validate. If we do have financial fears, is probably because we inherited them from somewhere, we learned them from somewhere, and then we have the ability to go out and say, okay, and is this true? Like, maybe it isn't, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but let me gather some information. And I think specifically around that question around credit scores, it is shocking to me, again, how poor the financial education is just for regular kids growing up and young adults, that teach them some very, very core concepts around the way that our financial institutions, at least if you're based in the US, how these things work. And when it comes to your credit score, I think what you would think, based on like logic, is, oh, it's responsible to hold maybe one or two credit cards, right? It's actually financially irresponsible to hold 22 different credit cards. So if I only have one or two cards, then my credit score is going to be better. And it's probably better for me not to have access to hundreds of thousands of dollars of credit, especially if I don't even need to use it. But what's fascinating about credit scores is that's not how it works at all. There's actually 5 major factors that influence your personal credit score. And I'm not going to go into all those factors, but I do want to touch on the top 2 because I think this helps dispel a lot of those concerns about getting into points travel or opening up one or more credit cards going to completely destroy my credit score. And the number one most important factor in terms of your credit score is your on-time payment history, meaning if you pay, your statement in full every single month, you're always on time with your payments, that actually accounts for 35% of your credit score. And so if you have a very, very good financial habit around paying your credit card statements on time, that is going to be enormously positively impactful on your credit score. And the second thing, and this is the piece that so many people don't understand, again, because they were never taught, that is very counterintuitive around your credit score and what credit cards do to them. And that second factor, the second most important factor in determining your credit score, it accounts for like 30% of your credit score, is what's called credit utilization ratio. And all that means is that if you look at all the credit cards you have, whether it's 1 or 5 or 10, and you add up all those credit lines of the amount of credit available to you, what banks actually want to see is that you have a lot of credit available and you barely use it, which means you have a very low credit utilization ratio. And when you have a low credit utilization ratio, somewhere around 10% or lower at any given time, that is enormously positively impactful on your credit score. And that is the counterintuitive piece, because I hear people say all the time, I have my one trusty credit card. That's the one I use for everything. And I'm scared if I open up more credit cards, it is going to negatively impact my score. And what I tell them is that, again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you my own experience and the experience of thousands now of people that I've worked with and helped do this, is that when you open up new credit cards, each one is going to have a credit line. So overall, the amount of total credit extended to you is going to increase as you open up new cards. But if your spending is staying the same, right? We're not going out and spending all this extra money. If we're still spending the same amount of money we would otherwise, your credit utilization is actually going to plummet. Like if you spend about $5,000 a month on credit cards, if you have one credit card with a $10,000 credit limit, even if you're paying off that bill every month, you're using 50% of your overall credit. Now, if you open up a couple extra cards, right, and now you have $100,000 of total credit available to you, and you're still using $5,000 a month, your credit utilization now is 5%, right? So you're spending the same amount of money, but your credit utilization has gone way down, and that has such a positive impact on your credit score that actually what I tend to hear from people, and this was my personal experience, is that you can open up multiple credit cards as long as you maintain, again, very, very good habits around paying off your credit card statement, in full monthly, that actually most people's credit scores end up going up when they open up more credit cards. And it is specifically because of this piece about credit utilization ratio. So, I never, ever, ever fault anyone for having fears or concerns around credit cards, because I know from personal experience, so much of that comes from either a poor financial education or just a complete lack of financial education.
I mean, you're so right. It's absolutely counterintuitive. It's also what I saw in my life as well. And you would never believe it unless you saw it, right? It's true. We don't know these things.
Yeah. I think that education, that self-education is so critical. And just as you said, it was not a part of any of our standard education, K through 12, even, medical school residency, when people are taking on sometimes hundreds and thousands of dollars of debt. It's not a part of our training. And you said something around, keeping your normal expenses and not necessarily spending more. And we've heard you say in the past too, that our expenses are actually our greatest untapped asset when it comes to points travel. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, to take this back to just how I found out about this world is when I was just trying to learn about personal finance. And I think that, there's so many amazing resources out there to learn about the basics of personal finance. And one of the things that I was learning that I think a lot of people, it's within sort of the cultural understanding, is that, if you have money left over after paying all of your bills, that, you can do things to really leverage the ability of that money to grow for you and work for you, right? So you can put money into a traditional retirement account. You can put money into investments like the stock market. You can invest in real estate. The whole theory being that if we have leftover money, at the end of the month, if all we did was keep that money in a big bag, in our closet, over time, that money is going to lose value, right? Because of inflation. And conversely, if we take that money and we actually invest it or we put it into some of these other vehicles, theoretically, it can grow at a faster rate than inflation. So we end up with more, 20 years down the line or 40 years down the line. And this all makes sense. And I think this is probably why a lot of people who do have the ability and the privilege to be able to invest money, why a lot of people do, at least again, based in the United States, because we see the value of that money growing over time. And all of that made sense to me. I was on board with that. I was like, great, I'll invest in retirement. I'll invest in a taxable account. And at the same time, I'm learning about credit cards and understanding that, again, if I have a certain credit card that is going to give me extra points when I specifically put my grocery expenses on that credit card, or when I put, travel related expenses on the credit card, and that some credit cards are going to bonus me even more. And I can turn those points again into certain types of travel experiences. For the very first time, I realized, wait a minute, nobody is talking about the benefit of expenses. I think it's always kind of talked about as like this unfortunate thing, right? Like everyone's got to pay money to run aspects of their life. And this is basically like just what you have to do as an adult, right? You got to spend money so that you can either get a good or a service, or you can pay for something that you need. But the real, to me, the conversation around expenses kind of online and in finance was always, you got to pay money because you have needs, right? Like you need to pay for electricity, or you need to pay for gas to put in your car to drive to work. So really, the money that you're spending on your expenses, you get the benefit of the thing you were buying. But learning about credit card points, I realized, well, that's absolutely true. And right, just the way that we can leverage disposable income and have that grow and work for us by compounding, in terms of investments or retirement. Wait a minute, my expenses can absolutely get me the things I need. But if I'm very, very deliberate about how I actually leverage those expenses by putting them on these different rewards credit cards and earning higher rates of points, and I'm really good at using those points, my expenses now are actually generating significant amount of money for me in travel just because of points. And I realized there's nothing special about me. I'm just a person who spends money to run their life, right? Like this is basically every single, adult or independent, human being, in the country. And so if it's true for me, it's true for everybody that our expenses, if you know what to do with them, and if travel is important to you, all of this is in the context of specifically if you like to travel, and not everyone has to, but if you're someone who really loves travel, that you can actually leverage your expenses as assets. They can get you so much more than just the thing that you are paying for. And that to me feels like the biggest bonus of all, right? Because I'm still paying for my electricity, still paying for my groceries, but on the back end of that, I'm earning, again, this completely additional form of currency in the form of points. And I can trade those points in for real value travel. And I think that is the thing that when people do love travel, they don't realize that potential opportunity, because I am not talking about saving up points for 6 years and cashing them in for a bag of chips, right? Like, I don't think that effort would be worth it for me or for a lot of people. But when you really understand, again, that your expenses can be leveraged as assets to earn you a lot of this alternate form of currency, then I think that's when people's eyes really begin to open, because, we all do have different levels of expenses. And I think especially if you are in a situation where you have high expenses, then that just means you have more to leverage in terms of the points that you can potentially earn.
Gosh, I can't tell you how much I love that perspective. Like it's true. Expenses have always been this albatross on our right around our neck. And how amazing to think that we could actually get something from them. They could actually be there could be a silver lining. So I think that we may have listeners who, we're a little skeptical about points travel, but you've made it sound really good, Devon. But it is really intimidating, right? If you're completely a newbie, there is a lot to learn. So what would you say is the best way for someone to just dip their toe in if they really don't know anything about this hobby to begin with?
Yeah, I think honestly, this is what I did. I don't think I did this deliberately. It's just kind of how I learned at the time, but I think it worked really well, which is go slow. In some ways, I actually think the availability of information is sometimes a problem, because you can go online. And like you said, I mean, it can be so overwhelming and so intimidating. You hear people talk about literally, this is a blessing, I think, in the United States, we have access to literally like over 100 different credit cards, right? So if you're coming in brand new and you're hearing people throw around just tons of different names of cards, and they're throwing around all these different options of things you can do with points, I think it is very easy to become very quickly overwhelmed. A lot of us aren't walking around thinking, wow, I'd really love to pick up a hobby that's going to take me an extra 40 hours a week to learn how to do. Like most of us are not looking for that. And I think it can feel like that sometimes in the beginning of points travel. And so usually what I tell people in the beginning is start slow. And all you really need to begin with is just one card. Pick one solid, what I consider to be sort of, beginner or entry level credit card that can earn you points, and just get used to using that one card, right? Like get used to always paying off that bill in full every month. If you're very new to credit cards and you're used to paying for things directly, debit or bank transfer, just get used to using that one credit card, looking at your statement every month, understanding how your points are being accrued on that one card. And usually what happens is that once people kind of go through that first layer, like they overcome the first obstacle of like, is this really real?
Right.
Do I really want to do this? They get,
Mhm.
again, one just really solid kind of beginner's credit card. I think within a couple months, what happens for most people is then when they get very comfortable with that one credit card, they realize, oh, wait a minute, like this is actually pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy. It's pretty fun. Maybe I'm ready now to expand that a little bit, right? Like maybe I'm ready to think about a second credit card, or I've started earning all these points. Now I'm ready to learn just what's the easiest way for me to start using these points. And so, I don't know what there's all those different statistics about how many hours you have to spend in something before you're an expert or before you're really great at it. And I just like to remind people, you don't have to be good at this right away. And honestly, like one of my very favorite things about points compared to medicine, as much as I loved practicing medicine, is that the worst outcome in points is really not that big a deal, right? Like it's not like you're going to irreparably harm
Right.
someone, or there's going to be this just really, really horrific outcome. So for me, that's actually a very
Like you just get
comforting
economy
thought.
plus. and
Yeah,
everything
exactly. I'm like,
happens.
oh no, yeah, exactly. Like, and I can tell you all the mistakes I've made. It's like the biggest mistake is like, oh no, I found out a year later that basically, I used points and I could have, used half the number of points and gotten the same thing. Okay, that's a little discouraging, but at the same time,
Life
again,
goes
like
on,
in
right.
the scale,
Yeah.
right, in the scale of like significance, it is very, very insignificant. And so I personally think that that's one of the fun things about the points hobbies. Yes, of course you can make mistakes and you can get disappointed about that, but the stakes are really, really low. So if this isn't a predominantly fun hobby for you, then like you don't have to do it.
Mhm. And you will have those converts, right, who start slow, just as you said, and maybe they have, they've bought in and now want to go a little bit deeper and gain some actual expertise. What do you think is the best way for people to do that? What are some of the resources out there for actually gaining some expertise in credit card points?
Sure. And I think I think the problem with the internet is there's so much information, and the beauty of the internet is there's
Right.
so much
So
information,
true.
right? And so I think this is all about just being really aware of just what is your own capacity, right? Like what is your own capacity to want to dive into a new hobby or to learn a certain amount of information? Because I think once someone has started and again, they feel like they've got their feet under them, they understand kind of the basics of how this works, they're comfortable using at least one points earning credit card. That is more often than not, that's when people say that, have the experience I did where it's like, oh, wow, I really want to turn up the dial on this. Like, this is really fun. And, it's not that hard. It's not that complicated. And so now I want to dive in. And this is where I do think starting with free resources, there's nothing wrong with that because there's so many amazing ones. There are so many now, especially great points podcasts you can follow. I have a couple favorite I'm happy to mention. There are, just type into Google, rewards credit card blog or points travel. You're gonna get more page options than you can possibly sift through. And I do think that part of learning about points is finding that community, because the communities have slightly different personalities. Finding the community that really resonates with you. I think one of the things that I noticed when I was learning about points, and I think is one of the bigger reasons why, in the last 2 years, I really have made a concerted effort to create an additional community in the broader kind of points travel world, is that, I felt like a lot of the information wasn't geared towards people that had kind of the same financial situation as me, again, where I had probably, a higher income than the average American, but I also $300,000 of student loan debt, and I was like, where are the conversations about how can we potentially earn points if it's possible to pay down student loans, or how can I earn points when I'm trying to catch up on these other financial goals, where again, as much as I love a good business class flight, I'm not going to pick that over putting some money into my kid's 529 plan, right?
Right.
And so, what felt like for me, there was so much great points information out there, but it didn't really feel like there was a lot of strategy and talking about what is different about the points world if you do happen to be someone who has higher than average expenses, because the approach is a little different. And I say that just to reassure everybody that there's a points community for you. Like whether your favorite type of points travel is domestic economy travel, right? Like there's nothing wrong with that at all. If you've got a wish to see all 50 states, or you have family spread out and you want to travel predominantly, in economy domestically, there are great communities for that, right? There are the communities for, they tend to be like single dudes, who are, flying every first class product internationally ever, who clearly don't have to worry about school schedules, and like,
yeah, seriously.
That's great, right? Like there's a community for that. And so just one of my recommendations is that if this is fun and interesting to you, just be reassured there are so many different amazing points communities. And a lot of what it is just finding the one, that talks about the type of travel that matters to you, or the type of people, you can relate to in terms of your spend patterns or what you're looking to get out of points travel.
And Devon, you also have an online course and a podcast dedicated to, your specific community that you've created.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my business is called Point Me to First Class. I will tell you, I am not biased only towards premium travel. I love helping people understand how they can also use points for economy travel. I think that that's also an amazing option. But my podcast is the same name, Point Me to First Class. And really, I do have a focus on helping people who specifically have higher than average expenses. So whether that's your personal expenses, because it just costs money to run your life, and also business owners. I work with a lot of physicians who own medical practices. I work with other professionals who own, dental practices or law practices or online service providers, who run online businesses. If you have a business, as you probably are familiar, it takes a lot of money, to run certain businesses. And just like I was saying before, when you start viewing your expenses as assets, whether it's coming from personal spend or business spend, you just start seeing all of that as potential to earn points. And so my podcast really is geared towards helping people think about this whole points hobby and what are the points earning approaches that I think make a lot of sense when you do have a certain level of spend to leverage. And then speaking about kind of for the people who, again, are really on board, they want to learn how to do this. And like a lot of us, they're really busy and they don't, like I said, want to be coming through the internet 40 hours a week like I did, because that was actually fun and easy for me at the time. I didn't have kids when I first learned about this. So I had, my weekends, I could read the internet, for 5 hours. I also have a course that's called Points Made Easy. And this is really dedicated to collapsing really the amount of time that it takes to learn how to do this all on yourself, because you can learn how to do this by yourself, absolutely. But if you don't want it to take the 2, 3, 4, 5 years that it really does take to become really, really expert at how to earn and use points, then come and join a course like mine where I'm going to teach you how to do it in a couple months. You're going to have a ton of hands-on support, because to me, the whole point, no pun intended, of all of this, right, is to be able to travel. So, don't put that off for 4 or 5 or 6 years. If you have a real desire to learn how to do this, you could be flying your next points flight 6 months from now if you wanted to.
I mean, right? That is very tempting. So it's funny because it's very daunting to think about dedicating 6 months or 5 years to learning something on your own, although it is certainly possible. But when you think about what the reward is of putting in an investment, whether that's time or putting an investment into a course or whatever it may be, you love to think about what might be on the other side of that. So can you share with us, for some encouragement, some of the greatest wins that either you've had or that you've seen clients have?
Yes. I mean, I could share with you so many wins. And I think this is when people start to see, oh, wait a minute, this is actually realistically possible. That's
right.
why I'm saying, like, if this is appealing to you, you don't want to wait 5 years to learn how to do this. So I think one of the easiest, like this is something that I think almost everybody who really gets into points and feels pretty comfortable earning points, this is one of the easiest ways to get a ton of value first. There's a lot of people who are based in North America who want to go to Europe, right? You've got the dream of going to Paris. One of the best deals right now in points is that you can fly from the US to Europe and vice versa on Air France, which has a really beautiful business class. They have a really nice premium economy and economy as well. But you can get a round trip business class ticket on Air France for around 110,000 points, which, just to put this in perspective, because I don't expect anyone to understand what that
Lisa
means.
And I are nodding.
If you have 110,000,
sounds great.
Okay,
Actually.
good. If you have
Salivating.
110,000 points, and you, the only thing you know how to do with them is use them through, your credit card account itself. You can get like $1,000 worth of travel for that, which isn't terrible, right? But this is the whole point, is that when you really learn how to maximize these points, most of us who've ever priced out flights, I think you'll realize that a round trip business class flight to Europe is probably going to run you a heck of a lot more than $1,000, right? Like easily $3,000-$4,000. So you're getting triple, quadruple the value of your points. And the one thing I love about that redemption is, first of all, there's so many amazing places in Europe that you can go. And Air France Flying Blue, that's the name of their frequent flyer program. They're really amazing about making multiple business class seats available on a flight. So if you're not a solo traveler, right? If you want to take your parents somewhere, or if you have a family and you're looking for more than one, business class seat on an airplane, Air France is amazing about opening up a lot of business class seats. And so I think that to me is kind of one of the very classic, like first redemptions that a lot of people experience, because it's really easy to book. Again, there's so many amazing places in Europe to go, and it's such an incredible value. And then there are some really wild things that you can do from there, and like I was thinking earlier this year, one of the things that really changed for me about travel when I first started doing this, like I mentioned, I had no kids. I was still predominantly solo traveling, even though I am partnered, because I would go to a conference, or, I would go, and solo travel has always been a big part of my life. So I would just go somewhere by myself. And I never really cared that much about hotels. And that changed for me very drastically once I had children, because we never had our children sleep in our room with us as infants or with each other. I have 2 kids. And we realized very quickly, if as a family, we have to share a 200 square foot hotel room, no one is sleeping. Everyone is miserable. It's not a vacation at all. And everyone just wants to quit and go home after a day. And what I realized was, wait a minute, if you've ever priced out a hotel in a reasonably sized city that has, they're always called a suite, but it essentially has a proper separated bedroom and then more of a living area. I mean, I don't care where you are. Those suites are always going to run you over $1,000 a night. And again, if you're thinking about a week-long vacation with your family, most of us don't have $7,000 to $10,000 or more just for the accommodation portion of our trip. And this is one area that I think points is amazing. And so over my kids' spring break this year in March, we took them to Hawaii, and there was a beautiful Hyatt on the island of Kauai. One of my favorite things about Hyatt is that not only can you book just their regular standard level rooms with points, but oftentimes you can book yourself straight into a suite using points, which for my family is key. I will not book us for a family vacation if I don't know that we're going to end up in a suite. And we had this stunning, 1-bedroom oceanfront suite for an entire week in Kauai over spring break. So it's not like I'm telling people you have to travel on the off travel season from a Tuesday to a Tuesday. No, this was family travel on spring break from Saturday to Saturday. I paid $0 for that hotel room. And otherwise it prices out at over $20,000. Wow. And again,
oh my gosh,
I'm personally, at least at this point in my life, like I'm not spending $20,000, on a hotel room for a week. And this is just one example. I mean, there's so much amazing opportunity in the world of points travel to save literally thousands of dollars on travel a year. And again, whether that is so that you can just bring down the cost of your own travel and use that money in other areas of your life, or if you do have a travel budget, but it sounds really awesome if you could actually 5 times that travel budget without spending 5 times the money. There's so many different possibilities in the points travel world, which is one of the things that I think makes it so fun.
Oh my gosh, that is so inspiring. And now I have new goals. And you clearly, you've become such an expert in this, and you've delved so deeply that you actually have left medicine to pursue this as a career. Can you talk about that? So how did you decide? How did you come to leaving your medical career and making points your full-time job?
Yeah. What's interesting is that they weren't actually a connected decision. I think when people know that I don't practice medicine anymore and that I do full-time work in my own business, teaching other people how to earn and use points, I think it's very natural for people to think that I shifted from one specifically to the other. And that actually was not my experience. So as I mentioned, I finished all of my training in 2012 and I joined a small physician-owned private practice in the area where I still live in Chicago. And I worked a very traditional, full-time physician job, and was learning the points. It's just a personal hobby on the side, right? This is what helped my brain rest when I needed to take a break, from work for 15 minutes, and read something. So I was just doing points travel for myself because it was a lot of fun. And, it was a non-stressful thing for me to be able to learn about and think about when I wasn't practicing medicine. And I was in that practice for about 7 years. And as I think some people can probably relate to, over that time, even though it was only 7 years, a lot of things changed. There were some pretty significant changes just in the state where I practiced in terms of some laws and regulations that really affected the specialty that I was in. The practice that I was in was undergoing a lot of changes, and it was just really challenging. There were a lot of things that came up for me in that job where they just became not a very good work environment for me. And, one of the things about practicing, I practice a subspecialty, and I did that 100% of my time. One of the challenges is that when you are very subspecialized, there's not always, another practice across the street where you can just jump and go to, if things are really challenging or if it's no longer a good fit. And ultimately, what happened for me is that the practice I was in just was not a good fit for me at the end of that time. And it was a really hard decision for me to make that it just wasn't a place that I could then see myself until I was 65, which is kind of what I thought when I got that job. It's going to be my forever job. And, I just had to make a decision that for myself, practicing in that environment was actually not a great thing for me anymore. And so I deliberately stepped away from that practice in randomly just August of 2019, thinking, I'm going to take a little bit of time. My kids were both very young at that point. I barely had seen them because I'd been, working so much, the time, from when I had them, that I was just like, I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to reassess my options. Let me see kind of what I want to do. Lo and behold, 2020 made a lot of decisions for a lot of us that we weren't anticipating. I ended up, in some ways, it was very fortunate that I was able to then be at home with two very little kids, 100% of the time, when all of our other layers of care completely evaporated, I think a lot of people experienced. And so, by the time everything kind of semi-renormalized, and I'd been evaluating, my different practice options, and there was just nothing locally that was a very good fit for me professionally. And so kind of then at that point, I was faced with this decision about, do I really want to figure out a different way to practice medicine or utilize, the skills that I learned in medicine? Or do I take this thing that I've been doing on my own now for 8 years and that I've always wanted to teach people, but there just never really seemed to be an avenue to do it? And should I kind of try to make a business out of that? And so it was this gradual kind of organic transition where then I decided towards the end of 2021, well, let me just see if anybody even wants to talk about this. Because for a long time I thought, well, I love this hobby, but everyone else is busy. No one else is going to want to do this. Like my husband barely wants to talk to me about this. No one else is going to want to either, And so for me, it was really just an experiment of, if I open up this place of community, are other women even going to want to get together and talk about this, which is kind of where my Facebook group came from. And lo and behold, people did want to talk about this and they wanted to learn about it. And I think that is what really gave me the encouragement to say, I'm going to go and I'm going to build a business around this because, again, it's something I've always loved. I love teaching. I love helping other people. And I especially love seeing women fly and travel in ways they never imagined possible simply by learning how to do this one hobby. So it was, again, a gradual transition. It wasn't, I practiced medicine and then was like, wow, I'm going to go full force into my business. But, it was, for me, I think, a really lovely transition overall.
What a great origin story. I love hearing these kinds of stories because, Devon, I did think that. I did just assume that you had left medicine in order to pursue your business. So it's really encouraging, I think, to hear the different ways that successful people and particularly successful women have managed to follow their dreams. And so this is a little bit of a different note, but what would you say to people, who might be in a similar position to where you were 4 years ago, who might also have a passion for something completely different than what they invested educational time in? What's the best way to overcome the fear of taking that leap?
If you have a passion for something, I think especially if it's outside of what you were professionally trained to do, to validate that passion to yourself first. I think that's really, really important. It's not frivolous. It's not dumb. It's not useless. If you have a passion for something, I think that's incredibly valid. And then what you can do is, I think this is kind of what I saw in myself. So I want to help other people not fall into this same trap. I think especially if you do come from an educational or professional background where you've had a 20-year plan. A lot of us, when we were getting into medicine, we're like, oh, I know. I'm going to go to high school and get straight A's. I'm going to spend 4 years in undergrad and do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to do 4 years of residency. Right? It's like we have this whole entire plan laid out in front of us. And I think a lot of us find a lot of comfort in that plan. And the flip side of that is if you're trying something new, if the plan is not obvious, I think it can be very, very intimidating. I think people can hold themselves back and say, but I don't know, right? Like I don't know all the steps, or I don't know how this is going to turn out. Therefore, I just shouldn't try it all. And what I really want to encourage people is, if you are a planner like me, like I love planning, I love to know what to expect for the next 27 years. If you notice that you have that tendency, please just remind yourself that in some areas of your life, especially if you are trying something new, a new venture, you don't have to know the whole plan up front. All you have to do is literally take the next step. If I don't have to know the entire plan from start to finish right now before I do anything, just what is one step I could take that's at least going to give me more information? And especially I think in business and entrepreneurship, a lot of it from that point on is then taking one step, seeing what you learn in that step, and then saying, now with this new knowledge, what now is the next step to take? And there's no way, to know that ahead of time.
I love that. I think that's so freeing. And just this whole discussion has been so inspiring, Devon. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and also your encouragement, because, there are really two things I think we can take away from this. One being that there may be a whole new world of travel that that our listeners or that we ourselves didn't know was out there, but also that if you have another passion that may not be what you thought you would do when you were 5 years old, that might be out there with doors open for you as well. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I will take any opportunity to talk about points that I can, but I've especially loved this conversation with both of you. Thank you so much for the invitation to come here. I had such a wonderful time with you both.
Thank you
It was
so
our
much.
pleasure. Thanks so much to Dr. Devon Gimbel for sharing her personal story and her expertise on the world of points travel. While of course we think that you should never go into debt, spend beyond your means, or open credit cards without knowing the terms and exactly how they'll affect your personal finances, points travel done right can lead to amazing things for you and your friends and family. For more information on Devon's podcast and course, and to check out our other episodes on travel, visit our show notes at hippocratichost.com. So that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening and for all your support. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and other major social media platforms, and subscribe and review us in Apple Podcasts, because reviewing helps other people like you find the show. And if you'd like to support us with a monthly donation, just go to our website at hippocratichost.com and click on the Become a Friend of the Show button. We'll be forever grateful. Thanks everyone, and talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to Health at Home with the Hippocratic Hosts. Remember that all views expressed here are our own, not our employers, and all content is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice, nor the establishment of a doctor-patient relationship. Always consult your own physician or healthcare team for any medical issues.
If you enjoyed this episode, please rate us, subscribe, and tell a friend. And check out our website at www.hippocratichosts.com for show notes on this and all our episodes. Can't wait to chat with you next time.